Your career path could once have involved shoveling human waste by moonlight. We are exploring 30 medieval jobs that no longer exist in the modern world. By the end, you will understand the hidden engine of an entire society and see the ghost of your own job in the past. Who decided it was a good idea to test beer by sitting in it? And what became of the people paid to be whipped for a prince's mistakes? What does it mean for a way of life when an entire catalogue of human expertise simply vanishes? The world of work was a different country back then, governed by rules that seem alien to us now. To make sense of these forgotten careers, we need to step into that landscape to see the shape of the society that created them. This was the age of feudalism, a system where everything from your daily bread to your ultimate safety depended on your place within a strict, unyielding hierarchy. Land was the ultimate currency, and power flowed from who owned it. For the vast majority, life was lived on a manor, as a peasant bound to the Lord's fields. Your world was the soil you tilled, the village you were born in, and the seasons that dictated every action. Over this agricultural foundation, towns began to rise like islands of a different order. Here, trade and specialized craft took root, protected and regulated by powerful organizations called guilds. These guilds controlled quality, set prices, and guarded the secrets of their trades with fierce loyalty. Imagine a world without instant communication, where news traveled only as fast as a horse could run, and light vanished with the sunset. There were no factories humming with machines, no global supply chains, just human hands, animal power, and the relentless demands of local survival. This is the crucial backdrop. Every single one of the jobs we are about to uncover was not a random oddity but a logical, necessary cog in this vast pre-industrial machine. They were answers to the very specific questions posed by daily medieval life. How do you maintain public health without modern plumbing? How do you enforce laws without a professional police force? How do you provide spiritual comfort or public entertainment in a world where community was your entire universe? When we look at these roles through this lens, they stop being mere curiosities. They become a story of human ingenuity and adaptation, a testament to how communities organized themselves to meet the challenges of their time. The disappearance of these jobs tells us just as much about our own world as it does about theirs. But how do we know any of this? How can we be so certain about the daily grind of a person who lived 7 centuries ago? The answer lies in a remarkable detective story, one pieced together from fragments left behind. Our window into this lost world of work is not a single clear pane of glass, but a mosaic made from countless tiny, colored shards of evidence. Each source tells a part of the truth, and when we fit them together, a vivid picture emerges. Take the dry, administrative records of the time. Manorial court rolls are tedious to read, filled with arguments over stolen chickens or broken fences, but they are gold for historians. In those disputes, you find people defined by their work: a miller accused of taking too much grain, a blacksmith sued for a poorly made plowshare. Their job was their identity, and the law recorded it. Then there are the guild records, the membership lists of these powerful trade unions. They name the masters, the journeymen, and the apprentices in a city, creating a census of skilled labor. Even something as impersonal as a tax record, like the Great Poll Tax of 1377, freezes a moment in time. It lists heads of households and often their occupations, giving us a statistical snapshot of an entire kingdom's workforce. Beyond the numbers and legalities, we have art and literature that breathe life into these titles. Look at the margins of an illuminated manuscript, those beautifully decorated prayer books. While the main page might show a saint, the borders often teem with tiny, vivid scenes of everyday life: a woman selling bread, a man harvesting grapes, a carpenter at his bench. These are not just decorations, they are snapshots. Tapestries hanging in cold stone halls did the same, weaving stories of both nobility and common labor into their threads. And then there are the writers. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales is perhaps the most famous guidebook to medieval careers ever written. He introduces us to a caste of pilgrims defined by their trades, the greedy miller with his thumb on the scale, the shrewd Reeve managing a lord's estate, the corrupt summoner who worked for the church courts. Chaucer did not invent these people, he satirized types that his audience would have recognized instantly. Their jobs were the punchline, the setting, the very core of their character. Finally, we have the silent testimony of the ground itself. Archaeology does not deal in job titles, but in objects. The discovery of a peculiar, specialized tool, the layout of a long-vanished workshop with its hearth and waste pits, the remnants of a tannery by a river, all these physical clues confirm what the documents and the art suggest. A strange bronze implement is just a curiosity until you match it to a description in a guild manual, and suddenly it becomes the key tool of a now-forgotten craft. By cross-referencing these sources, the paper trail, the artistic depiction, the literary caricature, and the physical artifact, historians do more than just list old job titles. They reconstruct a world. They can often tell us what the work felt like, how society viewed the worker, whether they were respected or ridiculed, and how essential their role was to the community's survival. This patchwork of proof is how we can confidently speak of a bell founder or a Cordwainer, not as mythical figures, but as real people who once got up in the morning and did a very specific, necessary thing. And with that foundation of how we know, we are ready to meet them. Our journey into this catalogue of vanished vocations begins not at the top of society, but at its very foundation, with the most common experience of the medieval world, the relentless, intimate relationship with the land. The soil of the manor fed the body, but the survival of a growing town depended on solving a more immediate problem. Within crowded city walls, the most basic human function became a logistical nightmare. Our first vanished profession was born from this daily, inescapable reality, a job defined by darkness and necessity. Meet the Gong farmer. When the sun went down and the city gates were locked, this was their time. Their world was the privy, the cesspit, the reeking underbelly of urban life. Armed with little more than a shovel, a lantern, and a strong stomach, their task was simple in description but horrific in practice. They emptied the deep, stone-lined pits that served as the communal toilets for households, inns, and monasteries. The waste, known politely as night soil, was loaded onto specially designed, hopefully leak-proof carts. Under cover of darkness, this silent procession would wind through the narrow streets, heading for a gate left slightly ajar for them, to dispose of their cargo beyond the walls. The social price of this essential service was immense. Gong farmers, also called nightmen or muckrakers, lived in a state of permanent ostracism. They often resided in isolated huts outside the town, and their movement in daylight was restricted. The foul odor that clung to them was seen as more than just unpleasant. It was considered a miasma, a literal vapor of disease. They were paid, yes, and sometimes paid well for the tremendous risk, but no amount of coin could wash away the stigma. They were the human plumbing of their age, a vital yet invisible component in the fight against filth. Their work, as revolting as it was, represented a crude understanding of public health. Removing the waste prevented wells from becoming contaminated and slowed the spread of illness in tightly packed communities. The disappearance of the Gong farmer is a direct map of technological progress. They were not replaced by another kind of worker, but by an idea, the concept of automated, underground sanitation. With the widespread adoption of modern sewer systems and flushing toilets, the nightly pilgrimage of the nightman faded into history. His shovel was retired, replaced by the silent, unseen flow of water through pipes. This first job sets a pattern we will see again and again, a vital service rendered obsolete not by societal change, but by a fundamental re-engineering of the human environment. The Gong farmer worked in literal darkness, but another essential medieval profession was defined by a different kind of murk, the thick, sudsy water of a cloth walker's vat. If the first job dealt with the body's output, this next one was central to covering the body itself. Enter the fuller, the alchemist of the medieval wardrobe. In a world where wool was the primary fabric for everything from peasant tunics to noble robes, the fuller's workshop was the critical bridge between rough, loosely woven cloth and the durable, weather-resistant material people actually wore. Fresh from the loom, woolen fabric was greasy, loose, and riddled with natural oils and dirt from the sheep. It was not yet fit for purpose. The fuller's craft transformed this raw material through a process that was equal parts chemistry and sheer physical exertion. The cloth would be soaked in a large trough filled with water and a remarkable natural detergent known as fuller's earth, a fine clay that absorbed grease and impurities. Then the fuller would step into the vat. For hours they would tread the sodden cloth with their bare feet, stomping, kneading, and agitating the fibers in a rhythmic dance known as walking or treading. This was not merely cleaning. The constant pressure and friction caused the tiny scales on the wool fibers to interlock, a process called felting. The fabric would shrink in size but gain immensely in density and strength, becoming thicker, warmer, and more resistant to wind and rain. It was exhausting, wet, and humble work, yet it placed the fuller at the heart of one of the Middle Ages' most important economic engines, the textile trade. Their workshops, often fulling mills built beside fast-flowing streams, were hubs of industry. The rhythmic thump of the walker's feet was the heartbeat of cloth production. This sound, however, began to change. As early as the late 12th century, innovation started to mechanize the process. Ingenious medieval engineers adapted the water wheel to power wooden hammers called stocks, which would beat the cloth automatically. These mechanical fulling mills could process far more material than a team of human walkers, and they began to shift the industry's geography toward powerful rivers. Yet the human fuller did not vanish overnight. For centuries, the craft persisted in smaller towns and for finer grades of cloth that required a careful, experienced touch. The job's final obsolescence came not from water power, but from the steam-driven machinery of the Industrial Revolution, which perfected and scaled the process beyond any human capacity. The fuller's legacy is woven into the language itself, from place names like Walkerville to the term fulling itself. They remind us that before automation, the quality of everyday life, the very feel of the clothes on your back, depended on the skilled, strenuous labor of individuals standing knee-deep in vats, turning messy raw material into something both useful and essential. The fullers transformed the raw fabric of society, but what about the liquid that fueled its daily life? In a world where water sources could be perilous, ale was not a luxury. It was a staple consumed by men, women, and even children with their meals. Its consistent quality was a matter of public health and trust. This vital need gave rise to a uniquely medieval civic role, the ale conner. Imagine a town official whose job description involved deliberately spilling beer and then sitting in it. While the famous image of the conner in leather breeches judging an ale by its stickiness is probably more legend than daily practice, it points to a deeper truth. This was a hands-on sensory science. The ale conner, sometimes called an ale taster or ale founder, was appointed by the local court or guild. Their primary duty was to protect the consumer. They would visit alewives, the women who dominated small-scale home brewing, and commercial brewers alike. They inspected the premises for cleanliness, sampled the product for taste and clarity, and most importantly, tested its strength. A brewer watering down their ale was not just committing fraud, they were undermining a fundamental source of nutrition and safe hydration. The conner used practical tools, a specialized tasting bowl, and a keen palate developed through experience. They checked for proper fermentation, the use of good barley and hops, and the absence of harmful adulterants. A failed inspection could mean a hefty fine for the brewer, their name recorded in the manor court rolls for all to see. The ale conner stood at the intersection of commerce, community, and survival. Their role ensured that the town's most common beverage was both wholesome and fairly traded. The disappearance of this specific title is a story of professionalization and scale. As brewing moved from countless small household operations into larger, industrialized breweries, quality control became internalized and later regulated by government agencies. The singular figure with the tasting bowl evolved into the modern frameworks of food and beverage inspection, public health boards, and standardized testing. The ale conner's legacy is not a pair of sticky leather pants, but the very idea that a community has a right to expect purity in what it consumes, a principle that moved from the medieval alehouse bench into the laboratories and law books of the modern world. The ale conner protected the community from within, but another profession arose to meet it at the very start of the day, acting as a living bridge between the private world of sleep and the public demands of the clock. In the gray, quiet hours before dawn, a solitary figure would walk the cobblestone streets of industrial towns. This was the knocker-up, a human alarm clock who sold the most precious commodity of the new industrial age, punctuality. Before the widespread ownership of reliable, affordable timepieces, ensuring an entire workforce arrived at the factory gates by the shrill whistle was a communal problem. The knocker-up provided the solution, often an elderly person or someone with an injury that prevented them from doing heavier labor. This individual would take on a roster of clients, each paying a few pennies a week for the service. Their toolkit was simple but effective. Some carried a long, slender pole, perfect for reaching upper-story windows. Others became experts with a pea shooter, firing dried peas with surprising accuracy to tap, tap, tap against the glass. The most direct might simply use their knuckles on a door or a downstairs window. Their job was not done with a single knock. They would wait, listening and watching for the agreed-upon signal, a candle being lit, a hand waved from behind the curtain, confirming the sleeper was awake. Only then would they move on to the next client, a silent sentinel ensuring the economic machine could start on time. This was more than a quirky service, it was a vital piece of social infrastructure. The knocker-up represented a deeply human adaptation to the rigid schedules of industrial life. They provided a livelihood for those who might otherwise struggle, and they offered peace of mind to entire families whose breadwinner could not afford to oversleep. Their disappearance was not sudden, but a slow fading brought on by personal technology. As mass-produced alarm clocks became cheaper and more reliable in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the need for the human touch at the window dwindled. What was once a public, communal ritual became a private, mechanical one. The knocker-up's legacy is a reminder that time itself was once a service, delivered not by a circuit board, but by a familiar face in the morning mist. The knocker-up's rhythmic taps faded with the dawn, but as evening descended, another solitary figure began their appointed rounds. Darkness was not merely the absence of light in a medieval town, it was a tangible presence, a cloak for danger and uncertainty. Against this, the Lamplighter waged a nightly, gentle war. Their tool was a long pole tipped with a flame, and their canvas was the growing shadows between buildings. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, this individual would begin a precise, unvarying route, reaching up to touch the wick of each street lamp, coaxing a small, warm globe of light into existence. These were not the brilliant electric arcs of today, but flickering oil flames or, later, the steady hiss of gas mantles. Each lit lamp created a fragile island of visibility, a pool of safety where commerce could linger, where a night watchman might see, and where an ordinary person could navigate the streets without fear of stumbling into an unseen hazard or a lurking threat. The Lamplighter was more than a municipal employee. They were a symbol of civic order pushing back the primal night. Their predictable appearance was a comfort, a sign that the community was still functioning, still watching over itself. They extended the usable hours of the day, enabling evening markets, social visits, and a sense of security that fundamentally altered urban life. Their work was a quiet, repetitive craft, a dance of timing and memory, knowing every lamp post, every stubborn wick, and every stretch of street that needed their light the most. The end of this profession was not a sudden blackout, but a slow, bright dimming. The invention of automatic ignition systems and, decisively, the spread of reliable electric street lighting with simple timers rendered the nightly pilgrimage obsolete. One by one, the lamps that required a human touch were replaced by those that woke and slept on their own. The Lamplighter's legacy is etched into our language and our nostalgia, a romantic figure from a time when light was a deliberate, human-made gift, not an assumed constant. Their vanishing marked the moment illumination ceased to be a service and became simply a service provided, an invisible utility we now take for granted with the flip of a switch. The Lamplighter's flame pushed back the physical darkness, but another profession operated in a moral twilight, answering a desperate need born from the pursuit of knowledge. As medical schools began to flourish in the 17th and 18th centuries, they faced a fundamental crisis. To train future surgeons and understand the human body, they required cadavers for dissection. Yet the legal supply was almost non-existent, restricted by law and powerful religious taboos that viewed the dissection of the dead as a profound desecration. Into this impossible gap stepped the Resurrectionist. Under the cover of moonless nights, these individuals would visit churchyards and cemeteries. Their work was swift and silent. They targeted fresh interments, using wooden shovels to muffle the sound, carefully excavating the coffin and removing the recently deceased. The body would be wrapped in sackcloth, transported in a discreet cart, and sold to an awaiting anatomist at a medical school. It was a transaction conducted in shadows, a grisly black market for human remains. This was not a medieval profession in its origin, but a direct, grim consequence of early modern scientific ambition crashing against ancient social boundaries. The Resurrectionist, often called a body snatcher, lived a life of profound social ostracism and constant legal peril. If caught, they faced severe punishment, not for murder, but for the theft of property, as the law defined the body as belonging to the estate of the deceased. They were universally reviled, seen as monsters who violated the sacred peace of the grave. Yet, in a terrible paradox, their illegal work became an unwitting, essential contributor to medical progress. The hands-on anatomical knowledge gained in those dissecting rooms, however acquired, saved countless future lives. The profession's end came not from a lack of demand, but from a societal reckoning. Public outrage over high-profile grave robbing scandals and a growing understanding of medicine's needs led to legislative change. Anatomy Acts passed in places like Britain in the early 19th century created a new ethical framework. They allowed for the legal donation of unclaimed bodies, such as those of individuals who died in prisons or poorhouses with no next of kin, to be used for medical education. This created a regulated, transparent system that severed the link between medical advancement and criminal activity. The Resurrectionist vanished because society finally chose to illuminate that moral gray area with law, transforming a secretive, reviled trade into a public, sanctioned process of donation and study. Their story is a stark chapter in the history of science, a reminder that progress sometimes walked a very dark path before finding its way into the light. The Resurrectionist's grim trade existed in the shadows of science, but another voice once echoed with absolute authority in the full light of day. In an age before newspapers, radio, or the internet, public information traveled on the breath of a single, appointed individual. The town crier was the official voice of authority, a walking, talking civic bulletin board. Appointed by the local council or the lord of the manor, this figure carried the weight of law and news on their shoulders. Their routine was a piece of public theater. They would walk to a central crossroads or market square, raise a handbell with a distinctive, clear ring, and call out the traditional cry, Oyez. Oyez, which simply means hear ye, hear ye. That sound was an irresistible summons, drawing people from their shops and homes to gather and listen. Once a crowd had assembled, the crier would deliver the message in a powerful, practiced voice, trained to project over street noise and the murmur of the crowd. The announcements were the lifeblood of the community. Royal proclamations such as the death of a monarch or the declaration of a new tax, local bylaws about sanitation or curfews, the dates and rules for the weekly market, even notices of lost property or upcoming public punishments, all flowed from the crier's lips. Accuracy was paramount. A good crier had to have a flawless memory and a clear, unambiguous delivery, for their words carried the force of law. Mispronouncing a single word in a legal decree could have serious consequences. They were more than just loudspeakers, they were trusted figures, often paid a small salary and sometimes granted special privileges, like being exempt from certain taxes, in recognition of their vital service to public order. Their voice was the connective tissue between the ruling class and the common people, the mechanism that turned distant decisions into local reality. The decline of the town crier was a slow, inevitable fade, not a sudden silencing. The invention of the printing press and the subsequent rise of cheap, widely distributed newspapers and public broadsides began the process. Why wait for the crier's next round when you could read the news at your leisure? Later, radio and television completed the transformation, allowing information to fly across vast distances instantaneously, reaching millions with a single broadcast. The human voice, no matter how strong, could not compete with that scale and speed. Today, the town crier survives as a ceremonial figure, a beloved piece of living history at festivals and official events, a nostalgic echo of a time when news was not something you checked, but something that gathered you together in the street. Their practical function was made obsolete not by another person, but by a fundamental shift in how humanity shares knowledge, from a communal listening post to a private, endless stream. The town crier gave voice to the law, but for the aches and ailments of the body, medieval medicine spoke a different language entirely. Its primary grammar was written in blood. For centuries, the dominant medical theory was the concept of the four humors. Physicians believed health was a delicate balance of four fluids within the body: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. An excess of any one, particularly blood, was thought to cause fever, inflammation, and a host of other illnesses. The cure was logical to them: to restore balance by removing the surplus. This practice, called bloodletting, was as common as taking an aspirin is today, and the most precise, popular instrument for this delicate task was not a blade, but a living creature, the medicinal leech. This created a demand that could only be met by venturing into the murky edges of the natural world, giving rise to a uniquely uncomfortable profession, the leech collector. Imagine the collector's workday. Armed with little more than a wooden bucket and a high tolerance for discomfort, they would wade into stagnant ponds, marshes, and slow-moving streams, the preferred habitats of the Gerudo medicinales. Their method was brutally direct. They would often use their own bare legs as bait, standing perfectly still in the cool water, waiting for the dark, slimy worms to sense their warmth and attach. Once a leech had fastened itself and begun to feed, the collector would gently pry it off and drop it into the bucket, ready for market. It was a tedious, prickly process, and repeated exposure left the collector's legs covered in tiny, itchy wounds that were prone to infection. The risk of contracting other illnesses from the contaminated water was a constant, grim occupational hazard. Yet, for those with few other options, it provided a living. The collected leeches were sold to apothecaries and barber surgeons, who kept them in special jars ready for use. A patient would be prescribed a certain number of leeches, often applied to a specific part of the body thought to be afflicted. The creature would painlessly numb the skin, make a small incision with its 3 jaws, and feed for up to an hour, drawing off a few teaspoons of blood while secreting anticoagulants that kept the wound bleeding slightly longer. To the medieval mind, this was advanced, targeted therapy. The leech collector's world began to dry up not because marshes disappeared, but because the medical philosophy that justified their work slowly evaporated. Throughout the 19th century, the ancient humoral theory crumbled under the weight of scientific observation and the rise of evidence-based medicine. Germ theory, understanding of the circulatory system, and clinical trials showed that bloodletting was, for most ailments, at best useless and at worst harmful, weakening patients who needed their strength. The demand for medicinal leeches plummeted almost overnight. The profession faded into obsolescence, a casualty of a paradigm shift in how we understand the human body. Interestingly, the leech itself did not go extinct. Modern medicine found a new, highly specialized role for it in the field of microsurgery, such as reattaching fingers or grafting skin. The leech's natural anticoagulants and gentle blood removal can help restore circulation in delicate, reconnected tissues. But today, these leeches are not gathered by a solitary figure in a swamp. They are bred in sterile, biomedical laboratories. The wild leech collector is gone, their uncomfortable craft transformed from a cornerstone of general practice into a precise, sanitized tool of modern science, a quiet testament to how far healing has traveled from the balance of humors to the biology of the cell. The leech collector's work was rooted in a flawed but logical system of healing, yet another medieval role was built upon a logic that feels utterly alien to our sense of justice. This job existed at the very pinnacle of society, in the royal nursery, and it turned a fundamental human relationship upside down. It was the position of the whipping boy. To understand this role, you must first understand a core belief of the era, the divine right of kings. A prince was not just a boy who would one day rule. He was seen as God's appointed representative on earth. His royal blood made his person sacred, untouchable. This created a profound practical problem for his tutors. How do you discipline a child who is, by definition, above punishment? The answer was as cruel as it was ingenious. A boy of noble birth, often from a loyal but less powerful family, would be brought to court. He would become the prince's constant companion, sharing his lessons, his meals, his play. They were to be inseparable friends, but this friendship came with a terrible price. Whenever the prince neglected his studies, acted out, or broke a rule, the tutor could not raise a hand to the royal heir. Instead, the whipping boy was summoned. He would be physically punished in the prince's stead, often with a birch rod or a cane, while the royal child was forced to watch. The theory was psychological. By witnessing the pain of his companion, a boy he presumably cared for, the prince would feel such shame and guilt that he would reform his behavior. The suffering of the friend was meant to educate the ruler. It was a bizarre transaction where one child's body paid for another child's moral lesson. Historical records suggest this practice was more than just a grim fairy tale. Figures like William Murray, who served as whipping boy to the future King Charles I of England, are well documented. Murray's loyalty was later rewarded with titles and lands, but that does not erase the fundamental strangeness of the arrangement. His body was a teaching tool, a living, feeling object lesson in royal accountability. The slow fade of the whipping boy mirrors a shift in two powerful ideas. First, educational philosophy began to move away from pure corporal punishment toward other methods of instruction and correction. Second, and more importantly, the unchallenged notion of the divine right of kings itself began to erode. As the absolute, sacred nature of monarchy was questioned, so too was the idea that a prince could not be held directly responsible. The whipping boy became an archaic relic, a symbol of a time when the law stopped at the throne, and justice for the powerful could be outsourced to the innocent. His disappearance marks the moment society began to insist that even kings, and certainly princes, were not above the consequences of their own actions. The whipping boy's world was one of absolute hierarchies, but another profession from the same era challenged the very nature of reality itself. In a dimly lit chamber filled with strange glassware and the scent of sulfur, the alchemists conducted their quiet rebellion against the limits of the material world. This was not a simple craftsman or a menial laborer, but a philosopher of matter, a seeker operating in the blurred space between science, spirituality, and art. Their grand, stated ambitions were the stuff of legend: to unlock the secret of transmuting common lead into precious gold, and to discover the elusive Philosopher's Stone, a substance believed to cure all illness and grant eternal life. To the modern mind, this sounds like pure fantasy, but for the alchemist, it was a serious, systematic pursuit rooted in a profound worldview. They saw the universe as a living, interconnected whole, where metals grew and matured in the earth like plants, and where human spiritual refinement mirrored processes one could perform in a laboratory. Their work was therefore a sacred endeavor, a quest for divine knowledge written in the language of chemicals and flames. Their laboratories or workshops were the forerunners of modern scientific labs. Here they pioneered techniques we still use today. The intricate coils of an alembic for distillation, used to purify liquids and isolate essential oils, came from their hands. Their experiments with acids and bases, their meticulous records of reactions, and their relentless trial and error with metals and minerals formed a vast, if often cryptic, body of practical knowledge. While the dream of creating gold from lead remained a dream, their process led to genuine, world-changing discoveries. In their search for the universal solvent or the elixir of life, they identified new elements and compounds. Their work laid the essential groundwork for the entire field of chemistry. Similarly, their herbal distillations and experiments with minerals for medicinal purposes directly informed the development of pharmacology. The remedies they concocted in hope of finding immortality sometimes yielded genuine, if humble, therapeutic effects. The alchemist was a profession sustained by a powerful human emotion, hope. They were often funded by wealthy patrons, from kings to merchants, all captivated by the twin promises of infinite wealth and everlasting health. This placed the alchemist in a precarious position, constantly balancing genuine inquiry with the need to show progress to their benefactors. The profession's extinction was not a sudden event, but a gradual transformation. The scientific revolution of the 17th century introduced a new paradigm, one based on rigorous experimentation, reproducible results, and a clear separation between objective observation and spiritual belief. What was once a single, unified quest for hidden truths began to fracture. The study of matter became the evidence-based field of chemistry. The pursuit of healing evolved into modern clinical medicine. The mystical and spiritual dimensions of the work faded from the laboratory, becoming the domain of philosophy and religion. The alchemists did not fail. They simply became obsolete as their singular roles split into the specialized vocations we recognize today. Their legacy is not a pile of gold, but the very flask on the chemist's bench and the principle that through experimentation, we can unlock the secrets of the natural world. The alchemist's cryptic symbols were a language of transformation, but for most people, the written word itself was a locked door. In a world where perhaps only 1 in 10 adults could read or write with any fluency, the power of the page was concentrated in the hands of a specialized few. This created a vital, everyday need for a human bridge between the spoken word and the permanent record, a role filled by the Scrivener. Picture a small wooden booth in a bustling market square, or a modest table set up in the shadow of a courthouse. There you would find the Scrivener surrounded by the tools of their trade, bottles of dark ink, sharpened quills, sheets of precious parchment or paper, and pots of fine sand for blotting. They were the public notary, the letter writer, the legal scribe, all rolled into one. For a small fee, they would listen carefully as a merchant described a contract for a shipment of wool, as a farmer dictated his last will and testament, or as a young soldier, far from home, struggled to compose a message to his family. The Scrivener's skill was not merely in forming elegant letters, but in understanding the formal language of law and commerce. They knew the precise phrasing needed to make a land transfer legally binding, the correct formulas for a marriage settlement, or the respectful tone required for a petition to a local lord. A single misplaced word could invalidate a document or change its meaning entirely, so trust was their most valuable asset. Their signature and seal at the bottom of a page gave it authority, turning personal agreement into public fact. They were, in essence, the human hard drives and printers of their age, the essential archivists of everyday life. Their work wove the threads of personal stories into the formal tapestry of history, one carefully inscribed deed or heartfelt letter at a time. The decline of the Scrivener was a slow, democratic revolution. The invention of the printing press was the first major blow, not because it printed novels, but because it could mass-produce standardized legal forms. Why pay a Scrivener to painstakingly draft a standard lease agreement when you could buy a printed one and just fill in the names? The next wave was the spread of universal public education, which steadily eroded the pool of clients who needed such a fundamental service. Finally, the personal typewriter and then the home computer completed the transformation, putting the tools of document creation directly into everyone's hands. The Scrivener did not vanish because their skill became useless, but because that skill was successfully given away to the entire population. Their quiet booth in the marketplace was replaced by the stationery store selling pre-printed forms, and later by the word processor on a desk. Their legacy is the very expectation that we can all be the authors of our own agreements and our own stories, a freedom they once provided as a service, but which we now possess as a common right. The Scrivener gave voice to agreements on paper, but a far more visceral threat required a different kind of specialist, one who worked in the dark corners and granaries of the medieval world. Cities were a feast for vermin. Warehouses groaned with grain, streets offered scraps, and wooden buildings provided endless nesting sites. The result was a plague of rats and mice, creatures that devoured precious food stores and, though no one knew it at the time, carried the fleas that spread the Black Death. Standing against this creeping tide was the rat catcher. This was not a uniformed municipal worker, but often a freelance operator, a figure who existed on the edges of respectable society. Their toolkit was a mix of ingenuity and brutality. Traps of wood and wire were common, but so were more active methods. Small, agile dogs like terriers were bred to bolt into burrows. The rat catcher's most famous ally, however, was the ferret. These long, slender weasels were sent down into rat holes to flush the panicked rodents out into waiting nets or into the jaws of dogs. For larger infestations, poisons like arsenic might be used, a risky practice that could just as easily sicken a household pet or child. The job was universally filthy, perpetually dangerous from bites and disease, and carried a social stigma almost as strong as the Gong farmers. Yet a skilled, reliable rat catcher could command good pay, especially from bakers, millers, and wealthy households whose fortunes could be literally eaten away. Their cultural footprint is immortalized in one of the most enduring folk tales of all, the Pied Piper of Hamelin. While the magical piper is a fantasy, historians note the story's roots likely lie in a real 13th century event, perhaps a charismatic recruiter leading young people away to settle new lands. The tale's central problem, however, is pure rat-catcher domain, a town so overrun with rodents it is willing to make a desperate, costly bargain. The Piper is the rat-catcher mythologized, a reminder of how vital and mysterious this figure seemed to communities at their wits' end. The profession's evolution into modern pest control is a story of chemistry and infrastructure. The independent operative with his ferret and bag was gradually replaced by companies employing scientific surveys, synthetic pesticides, and rodent-proofed buildings. More importantly, the same modern sanitation systems that retired the Gong farmer by securely containing waste and food removed the buffet that sustained massive rodent populations in the first place. The rat-catcher faded because the environment that created his necessity was systematically redesigned. Today, we see him as a whimsical, almost fairy tale character, but his historical reality was a gritty, essential battle in the endless war for public health, fought one squeaking, scurrying enemy at a time. The rat-catcher worked in the grime of the streets, but the value of his catch was nothing compared to the prized material that defined an entirely different class of artisan. In the guild halls of a prosperous town, the title Cordwainer was spoken with a quiet pride. This was not a simple cobbler, patching worn soles or mending broken straps. A Cordwainer was an artist of the foot, a creator of new shoes from the finest leather available. The very name came from their signature material, cordwain, a luxurious, supple leather originally from Cordoba in Spain. This was the medieval equivalent of a designer label, a mark of quality that separated the craftsman from the mere repairer. Their workshop was a place of quiet precision. The Cordwainer would begin with a careful measurement of the client's foot, no standard sizes here. Then came the skilled work of cutting the expensive cordwain leather with minimal waste, stitching it with strong, waxed thread, and the crucial process of lasting, where the leather upper was stretched over a wooden form called a last to give the shoe its final, elegant shape. The distinction was not just about pride, it was a matter of law and economics fiercely enforced by the powerful shoemakers' guilds. A cobbler who worked with old leather and repairs was legally forbidden from making new shoes. This protected the Cordwainer's exclusive, lucrative market serving nobility, wealthy merchants, and the church. Their craft was a direct line from the raw luxury of imported Spanish leather to a symbol of status walking through the muddy lanes. The Industrial Revolution did not just change how shoes were made, it changed the very idea of what a shoe was. Factories began producing sturdy, affordable footwear in standardized sizes by the thousands. The need for a bespoke, handcrafted pair for everyday wear evaporated for all but the very richest. The intricate, guild-protected title of Cordwainer lost its economic reason for being. The word itself began to fade, absorbed back into the more general terms of shoemaker or cobbler. Today, an artisan crafting custom shoes by hand might be called a bespoke shoemaker, a title that speaks to service, but the specific, guild-anchored identity of the Cordwainer, with its direct link to a prized material and a rigid social hierarchy, is a relic. It reminds us that before mass production, even a common object was often a unique collaboration between a specific craftsman, a specific material, and a specific individual's feet. The Cordwainer's craft was anchored in the tangible world of leather and law, but another profession traded in a currency that was entirely spiritual, a marketplace for the soul's salvation. In the shadow of the great cathedrals and along the dusty pilgrimage routes, you might encounter the pardoner. This was a church official, but one whose duties looked more like a merchant's. He was authorized to sell indulgences, formal documents issued by the church. To the medieval believer, these were not mere pieces of paper. They promised something of infinite value, a reduction in the time a loved one's soul, or even one's own soul, would have to spend being purified in purgatory before entering heaven. The theology behind this was complex, rooted in the idea of a treasury of merit built up by the saints and by Christ, which the church could dispense. But on the ground, the transaction was often starkly simple. A pardoner would arrive in a town, perhaps with a relic like a supposed bone of a saint or a fragment of the true cross. He would deliver a fiery, persuasive sermon, not just on piety, but on the very real terrors of purgatorial fire. He played masterfully on the profound fear people held for the fate of their own souls, and even more powerfully on their love and concern for departed family members. Then he would offer the solution, a signed indulgence. For a donation, a financial contribution to a church-building project or a charitable cause, you could purchase spiritual relief. In theory, the money was for a holy purpose, like constructing those magnificent cathedrals that still awe us today. In practice, the line between pious fundraising and blatant exploitation was notoriously thin. The pardoner became a figure of immense controversy and often of popular scorn. Geoffrey Chaucer immortalized this type in the Canterbury Tales, portraying his pardoner as a cynical, greedy man selling pig's bones as holy relics, openly admitting his sermons on greed were designed solely to make his audience feel guilty enough to open their purses. While not all pardoners were corrupt, the potential for abuse was woven into the system. It turned spiritual grace into a commercial transaction, accessible primarily to those with coin, leaving the poor to face divine justice with empty hands. This fundamental tension between faith and finance became a powder keg. The profession's end did not come from a change in technology, but from a seismic revolt of conscience. In the 16th century, reformers like Martin Luther pointed to the sale of indulgences as a symbol of everything they believed was wrong with the church. His famous 95 Theses were in part a direct attack on this practice. The Protestant Reformation that followed rejected the theology of purgatory and indulgences entirely, branding pardoners as frauds. Within the Catholic Church, the backlash was so severe that the Council of Trent, decades later, enacted strict reforms to curb the abuses, centralizing the granting of indulgences and stripping away the mercenary spectacle. The traveling pardoner, with his relics and his sales pitch, vanished from the roads. He was made obsolete not by a machine, but by an idea, the revolutionary notion that salvation could not and should not be bought and sold. His legacy is a cautionary tale about the perilous intersection of power, fear, and commerce, a reminder that the most profound human hopes can sometimes be shaped into the most earthly of trades. The pardoner sold hope for the afterlife, but on the muddy fields of France, a different kind of hope was measured in the flight of an arrow. The professional longbowman was not a part-time soldier or a conscripted peasant, but a career warrior whose entire life was shaped by a single, magnificent weapon. Following the stunning English victories at battles like Crecy and Agincourt, the value of these men soared. They were often yeomen, free men who owned small plots of land, and their status was built not on noble blood, but on a terrifying, hard-earned skill. Their tool was the English longbow, a simple-looking stave of yew wood standing over 6 feet tall. Its simplicity was a deception. To draw it required a lifetime of conditioning, often starting in boyhood, to develop the specific muscles needed to pull a draw weight that historians estimate could exceed 150 pounds. This was not mere archery, it was a physical discipline that reshaped the body, creating skeletons with enlarged left arms and thickened shoulder bones visible even centuries later. On the battlefield, this investment yielded a horrifying return. A trained longbowman could loose a dozen arrows a minute, creating a steel-tipped storm that darkened the sky. At close range, these arrows could punch through plate armor, turning the knight, the medieval tank, into a vulnerable target. The longbowman democratized warfare, proving that disciplined commoners with a superior weapon could defeat a force of expensively armored nobility. For over a century, they were the cornerstone of English military power, a professional class sustained by royal decree and constant practice. Their end, however, was not a result of lost knowledge or declining skill. but of a technological shift that changed the very logic of war. The development of reliable gunpowder weapons, like the arquebus and later the musket in the 16th century, introduced a new calculus. While early firearms were slower to load, less accurate, and prone to failure in wet weather, they possessed two decisive advantages. First, they could reliably defeat the best plate armor at ever-increasing ranges. Second, and most crucially for any ruler funding an army, they required far less training to use effectively. A farmer could be taught to load, aim, and fire a musket in a matter of weeks. It did not require the lifelong, bone-deep conditioning of the longbowman. The economic and tactical efficiency was undeniable. Why spend decades and vast resources cultivating a small elite of specialist archers when you could equip 1,000 infantrymen with guns after a few months of drill? The longbow, for all its lethal elegance, became a victim of democratization. The firearm, in its own messy, smoky way, made every soldier equally powerful at the pull of a trigger. The profession of the longbowman did not fade away. It was made obsolete by a new principle, that in modern war, the machine's power would eventually matter more than the individual's lifelong craft. The longbowman's battlefield was one of stark power, but within the royal court, truth often wore a more colorful disguise. Among the tapestries and thrones, one figure operated under a unique, sacred license, the Jester. To see them as a mere clown is to miss their profound, paradoxical role. Dressed in the iconic motley costume, a patchwork of bright colors symbolizing their fragmented, foolish nature, and carrying the marot, a scepter topped with a miniature replica of their own head, they were walking symbols of protected insanity. This visual identity was their armor. It granted them the license of the fool, a sanctioned space to say the unsayable. While a nobleman could lose his head for criticizing the king's policy, the jester could skewer the same idea in a witty rhyme, a biting pun, or a satirical skit, and be rewarded with laughter instead of punishment. They were a hybrid creature, part entertainer, part critic, and part confidant. Their skill set was vast. They might tumble in acrobatics, play a lively tune, deliver razor-sharp repartee, or perform a play that mocked the very people funding it. Their humor was the spoonful of sugar that made the medicine of hard truth go down. In a world of absolute power, they served as a vital, if quirky, pressure valve, a way for uncomfortable realities to be voiced and heard within the gilded cage of the court itself. Their decline was not a matter of people losing their sense of humor, but of society finding new venues for both entertainment and dissent. As European monarchies evolved through the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment, court life became more formal, more bureaucratic, and more concerned with dignified appearances. The idea of an officially sanctioned, motley-clad critic living in the palace began to seem archaic, even undignified. Simultaneously, the roles the jester once filled began to specialize and move out into the public sphere. Professional theater companies like Shakespeare's Lord Chamberlain's Men took over the business of staged satire and comedy. Political criticism, once whispered in a jester's joke, now roared in the cheap, mass-produced pamphlets flooding cities and in the spirited debates of coffee houses. The function of the fool was democratized, distributed among actors, writers, journalists, and ordinary citizens in public spaces. The jester, as a specific court office, became obsolete because the world no longer needed a single, privileged individual to speak truth to power. That role was slowly, messily, being claimed by the public itself. They remain in our imagination not as a failed profession, but as a romantic, poignant relic, a reminder of a time when the most dangerous ideas sometimes arrived wearing bells and a smile. The jester's bells faded into the echo of public debate, but another noble pursuit required a silence so profound you could hear the rustle of feathers. High above the misty fields, a peregrine falcon circled, its eyes missing nothing in the grass below. On the ground, a figure stood with a leather-gauntleted arm raised, waiting. This was the Falconer, and their craft was a silent conversation between human will and wild instinct. Falconry was far more than a medieval pastime. It was a complex science, a prestigious art form, and for the nobility, a vital symbol of status and skill. The laws of the era were explicit. The right to hunt with these majestic birds was reserved strictly for the upper classes, with specific species assigned to different ranks. A king might fly a powerful gerfalcon, while an earl flew a peregrine. The falconer was the essential human link in this ancient partnership, responsible for every aspect of the bird's life. Their work began with the dangerous task of capturing a young bird or eyres from a cliffside nest. Then came the long, patient process of manning, the gentle, relentless acclimation of a wild creature to human presence, to the jest straps on its legs, to the hood that calmed it, and finally to the lure. Training a bird of prey was an exercise in profound psychology, built not on domination but on a bond of mutual benefit. The falconer used hunger as a motivator, carefully controlling the bird's diet so it would return to the glove for a reward of meat. They learned every nuance of its behavior, its moods, its health. A master falconer could diagnose illness from a drooping feather or a change in posture. In the field, they were a team. The falconer would flush game from the brush, and the falcon, released from the glove, would become a feathered missile, striking with breathtaking speed. Success brought food for the lord's table and immense prestige. A skilled falconer held a respected, well-paid position in a great household, often passing their hard-won knowledge down through generations within a single family. The profession's shift from necessity to rarity is a map of changing landscapes, both physical and social. Enclosure laws and the privatization of common lands shrank the open hunting grounds essential for the sport. Changes in hunting technology, like the improved accuracy of firearms, offered a different kind of efficiency. Most fundamentally, the role of hunting itself transformed for the aristocracy. It was no longer a primary method of putting food on the table, but a leisurely recreational sport. The falconer, once as crucial as the gamekeeper or the huntsman, was no longer an essential staff member. The deep, specialized knowledge did not disappear, but it migrated. Today, falconry survives as a passionate niche pursuit, and falconers play a crucial role in modern conservation, using their ancient skills to rehabilitate injured raptors and hack young birds back into the wild. The professional court falconer, however, whose livelihood was woven into the fabric of feudal service and sustenance, has vanished. Their legacy is not in a job title, but in the enduring image of that partnership between human and bird, a fleeting moment of wildness perfectly restrained, now preserved more in art and memory than in daily practice on the windswept field. The falconer's partnership was one of noble prestige, but the safety of the ordinary townsperson after sunset fell to a far more humble figure. While the town crier spoke for authority by day, the crier of the watch was its lonely eyes and ears through the long, vulnerable night. This was the night watchman, a solitary sentinel whose voice was both a comfort and a warning in the sleeping streets. His duties were a simple, vital checklist for communal survival. He walked a regular beat, a living perimeter against the dangers that darkness could bring. With every passing hour, he would call it out, his voice cutting through the stillness, 10 o'clock and all's well. That familiar chant was more than just a time update, it was a signal. To the citizen lying awake in their bed, it was reassurance that someone was out there, that order was being maintained. To any potential wrongdoer, it was an announcement that the streets were watched. The crier reported the weather, warned of fire hazards like an unattended candle glow in a window, and challenged anyone moving without good reason. He was a one-man security system, fire alarm, and public clock, all wrapped in a heavy cloak against the chill. Yet this essential role was often filled by those with few other options. the elderly, the infirm, or those simply unable to find more profitable work. The pay was meager, the hours were long and cold, and the job could be deeply isolating. Shakespeare captured this perfectly in his comedy Much Ado About Nothing, where the Watchmen, led by the bumbling Dogberry, are well-meaning but comically incompetent, more concerned with pompous procedure than effective policing. While exaggerated for humor, the portrayal hinted at a real public skepticism about just how effective these solitary, untrained volunteers could be against determined criminals. The model's end was not a mystery but an inevitable reform. As cities exploded in size and complexity during the 19th century, the old system simply broke down. One man with a lantern and a loud voice could not secure a modern metropolis. The answer was centralization and professionalization. In London, the establishment of Sir Robert Peel's Metropolitan Police in 1829 created a paradigm shift. Here was a uniformed, disciplined, and full-time force, operating on regular shifts with a clear chain of command. Prevention and investigation replaced mere observation. The random, lonely chant of the watchman was replaced by the systematic, visible patrol of the bobby on his beat. The crier of the watch did not evolve. He was made obsolete by a new philosophy of public safety, one that understood security not as a solitary cry in the night, but as a coordinated civic institution. His passing marks the moment we stopped hoping a single voice could keep us safe and began building an organization designed to do it. The watchman's cry marked the hours, but in the quiet heart of a monastery, another kind of vigil was kept, one measured not in moments but in the slow, deliberate stroke of a pen. In a sunlit room called the scriptorium, rows of monks or nuns sat at wooden desks, their world reduced to the parchment before them and the whisper of a quill. This was the life of the monastic scribe, a calling that merged prayer with production, where copying a text was itself an act of devotion. Their work was the nervous system of medieval knowledge, the only way ideas could travel through time. Every book in existence, from the Psalms to the philosophy of Aristotle, depended on the willingness of a human hand to replicate it, letter by perfect letter. The scribe's tools were simple yet demanded the highest mastery. A goose quill carefully cut and sharpened, a pot of ink made from oak gall or soot, and sheets of vellum, the finest parchment made from calfskin, scraped and stretched to a smooth, creamy surface. Their skill was twofold. First, there was the penmanship itself, the development of a clear, consistent, and beautiful hand, like the stately Carolingian minuscule or the dense, textured blackletter. A single smudge, a misspelled word, could ruin days of labor, so focus was absolute, a form of meditation in action. Second, for the most important volumes, there was the art of illumination. After the text was copied, the scribe or a specialist artist would add elaborate decorations, intricate borders of vines and flowers, and the stunning historiated initials, small paintings within the capital letters that depicted biblical scenes or daily life. These were not mere decorations, they were visual theology, a way to make the sacred text shimmer with divine light. The completion of a major work, like a full Bible, was a monumental achievement, often taking a single scribe the better part of a decade. These books were priceless, locked in monastery libraries or cathedral treasuries, physical vessels of a culture's soul. The scribe did not see their labor as a job, but as a sacred duty, preserving the word of God and the wisdom of the ancients for future generations. Their world changed forever in the mid-15th century, in a workshop in Mainz. Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press with movable metal type did not just make books faster, it redefined the very nature of information. Where a scribe might produce one copy of a book in a year, a printing press could produce hundreds of identical copies in the same time. The economics were undeniable. Books, once luxury objects, began their journey toward becoming household items. The monastic scribe's primary function, as the essential manufacturer of texts, evaporated with breathtaking speed. The scriptorium fell silent, its holy labor made obsolete by the mechanical clatter of the press. Yet to say the scribe vanished is not entirely true. Their craft retreated from the center of production to the realms of art, ceremony, and personal discipline. The beautiful art of calligraphy endures, and the principles of fine bookbinding and illumination are kept alive by dedicated artisans. But the monastic scribe, as a specific vocation that powered the intellectual life of an entire continent, is gone. Their legacy is not found in a continued profession, but in the very objects we now take for granted, the printed pages that fill our libraries. They remind us that every idea we inherit once passed through the patient, faithful hands of someone who believed that preserving a thought was an act of eternal significance. The scribe's quiet scriptorium preserved knowledge, but the 14th century brought a terror that defied all written wisdom, a force that demanded not preservation but desperate, visible intervention. When the Black Death swept through Europe, it emptied streets and overwhelmed every known remedy. In this void of understanding, a new and haunting profession was born, the plague doctor. These were not the respected physicians of the university towns, but often lesser-trained practitioners, barber surgeons, or even volunteers appointed by a desperate town council. Their primary duty was grimly administrative: to enter infected homes, confirm the illness, and record the toll for the authorities. They became walking ledgers of loss in a society being unmade by an invisible enemy. To face this unseen horror, they clad themselves in a costume of speculative science. The iconic beaked mask was not theatrical, but a practical attempt at a theory. Medicine of the time believed diseases like the plague spread through miasma, poisonous bad air. The long beak of the mask was stuffed with aromatic herbs like rose petals, lavender, or cloves, a filter meant to purify the air before the doctor breathed it in. Their long leather gowns, gloves, and hats were an early attempt at a barrier, though they understood nothing of microscopic vectors. The tools of their trade were the standard and tragically useless arsenal of pre-scientific medicine, lancets for bloodletting and jars of leeches, practices that only weakened patients fighting for their lives. The plague doctor was therefore a paradox, a figure of authority equipped with near-total powerlessness, a symbol of order presiding over chaos. They took on a risk few would dare, entering the heart of the contagion for a meager salary, knowing they might not return. Their haunting silhouette is a portrait of human courage applied within a framework of profound misunderstanding. The profession did not evolve. It was completely dismantled by a revolution in thought. The slow, painstaking development of germ theory in the 19th century did not just provide better tools, it changed the fundamental question. Medicine stopped asking how to ward off bad air and began asking how to identify, isolate, and defeat specific pathogens. The plague doctor's herbal mask was replaced by the sterile face mask of epidemiology. Their ledger of the dead became the foundation for public health statistics and contact tracing. Their role fragmented into the specialized vocations of the modern world: the epidemiologist, the public health officer, the infectious disease specialist, all working from a map of reality the plague doctor could never have seen. The image of the beaked doctor remains with us not as a medical model, but as a cultural artifact, a stark reminder of the fear and ingenuity that arise when a society faces a crisis it cannot yet comprehend. The plague doctor's solitary vigil was a response to catastrophic failure, but another profession thrived on the quiet, predictable success of the harvest. In the patchwork of medieval fields, the rhythm of life was set by the seasons and the shared needs of the village. After the communal harvest, when the strips of grain had been cut, the land did not lie fallow for long. It transformed into a vital, shared resource, the common pasture, where every villager had the right to graze their few precious animals. This delicate balance between private cultivation and communal grazing required a referee. That referee was the Hayward. His name came from his duty to ward or guard the hay, which meant all the aftermath growth in the fields. Appointed by the village manor court, he was a local man, trusted to know every boundary stone, every cow, and every family's rights. His tools were his knowledge and his authority. From dawn until dusk, he patrolled the margins where the golden stubble of the harvested fields met the lush green of the meadows. His primary task was simple in concept but vital in practice: to keep the village's cows, sheep, and geese from wandering into the strips of crops still growing, or from overgrazing the common land before it could recover. He was the living fence, the human boundary marker. When he found an animal breaking the rules, perhaps a mischievous pig rooting in a neighbor's pea patch, his duty was clear. He would impound it, leading it to the village pound, a secure pen. The animal's owner would then have to pay a small fine to retrieve it, a system that enforced cooperation through gentle, local consequence. The Hayward was more than a constable of cattle. He was a guardian of the community's collective survival, ensuring that the shared land, which no single family could afford to lose, remained productive and fair for all. His world was defined by open fields and shared responsibility. That world began to vanish with the slow, relentless sweep of the enclosure movements. Starting in earnest in the 16th century and accelerating through the 18th, Acts of Parliament and private agreements allowed landlords to fence off or enclose the ancient common fields and pastures. What was once a communal chessboard of strips and shared grazing land was consolidated into neat, private, hedged fields owned by individual farmers. The economic arguments were powerful. Enclosed land could be farmed more efficiently with new methods, but the social cost was immense. The common rights that sustained countless peasant families were erased. And with the disappearance of the common land, the Hayward's entire reason for being evaporated. There were no shared boundaries left to patrol, no communal grazing rights to arbitrate. The new landscape of private property needed hedges, walls, and gamekeepers, not a parish officer mediating collective use. His role did not adapt, it simply dissolved, a quiet casualty of an agricultural revolution that reshaped not just the English countryside, but the very concept of community and land itself. His legacy is invisible on the modern map, written not in stone, but in the absence of the open fields he once so carefully watched over. The Hayward's world of shared fields vanished into private hedgerows, but another craftsman's domain was defined by the curve of a different kind of boundary, one that held the lifeblood of trade itself. The cooper was an architect of containment, a master of the wooden vessel that made the medieval and early modern world possible. In an age before cardboard, plastic, or standardized shipping containers, the barrel was the universal solution. It was strong, could be rolled by one or two people, stacked efficiently in a ship's hold or a warehouse, and when crafted by a true master, was perfectly watertight. The cooper's workshop was a symphony of wood, fire, and metal. He began with carefully selected oak staves, each shaped with precise angles so that when gathered in a circle, they would lean against one another without a single drop leaking through. Then came the art of the fire. The assembled staves were placed over a gentle heat, making the wood pliable. With rope and muscle, the cooper would draw the splayed top together, a process called raising the barrel before hammering the temporary truss hoops into place. The final act was the fitting of the permanent iron hoops, driven down with rhythmic blows from a driver, compressing the staves into that iconic, bulging shape. The sound of a cooper's hammer was the sound of commerce being prepared. His barrels held everything that defined an economy: wine from France, salted herring from the North Sea, nails from a Midlands forge, even the volatile gunpowder for armies and navies. A poorly made cask could mean financial ruin, a spoiled harvest, or a catastrophic explosion. The cooper was therefore not just a carpenter, he was a guarantor of quality in a world moving goods over vast, uncertain distances. His slow fade was not due to a loss of skill, but to a revolution in materials. The 19th and 20th centuries introduced a cascade of alternatives. The standardized metal drum arrived for industrial chemicals and fuels. Corrugated cardboard boxes, cheap and lightweight, conquered dry goods. Plastic containers, molded by the millions, took over food storage and shipping. Each new invention chipped away at the cooper's once universal market. The final blow was mechanization, the production line that could form, seal, and label containers without a single craftsman's touch. The cooper did not disappear, but he was pushed to the margins of necessity. Today, his art survives in the rarefied air of specialty spirits, where the charred interior of an oak barrel is an irreplaceable ingredient in the flavor of fine whiskey and wine, and in historical restoration. But the sight of a cooper's shop on every bustling waterfront, its air thick with the scent of toasted oak and the ring of the hoop driver, is a ghost of the past. His story is one of a container that once defined containment itself, a perfect technology made obsolete not because it failed, but because the world found 100 cheaper, lighter ways to hold its things. The cooper's barrels held the world's goods, but another voice was tasked with holding back the night's most common terror. While the crier of the watch announced the hour, a different figure walked with a more focused warning. This was the Bellman, and his rhythm was one of constant, gentle caution. His call was not about royal decrees or lost property, but about the simple, flammable facts of everyday life. As darkness settled over the timber-framed houses, his solitary patrol began. The sound of his handbell was a familiar signal, a cue for families to pause and listen. Then came the chant passed down through generations of men who held this duty. Take in your fire and mind your light, lest mischief should befall you this night. Every word was practical poetry. Take in your fire meant banking the hearth's embers for safety. Mind your light was a reminder to snuff out candles and rushlights before sleep. In a world where a single stray spark could turn a street into an inferno before the church bells could sound an alarm, his voice was a first line of defense. He was a walking, talking public service announcement, a repository of communal wisdom delivered at the exact moment it was needed. His role assumed a shared responsibility, that safety was not just an individual concern, but a neighborhood pact reinforced by a nightly human reminder. The Bellman's world was one of intimate vulnerability, where the fabric of a community was quite literally made of wood, thatch, and flame. His disappearance was a slow process of material and institutional change. The gradual shift to brick and stone construction in towns reduced, though never eliminated, the risk of catastrophic spreading fires. More reliable street lighting meant fewer open flames were needed to navigate after dark. But the decisive change was the professionalization of response. The establishment of organized, paid fire brigades with hand-pumped engines shifted the focus from prevention alone to a combined strategy of prevention and rapid suppression. The final, quiet end for the Bellman's call came with the invention of the automated smoke detector, a small device that could stand silent guard in every home, sounding an alarm more immediate and piercing than any human voice could muster. The responsibility for that fundamental warning moved from a man walking a beat to a sensor on a ceiling. The Bellman's legacy is not found in a modern job title, but in the very concept of fire safety education. His nightly verse evolved into the posters in schools, the test of home smoke alarms, and the community awareness campaigns. He was the original voice reminding us that vigilance is the price of safety, a message that now echoes not from a lantern-lit street, but from the countless tiny speakers in our homes waiting for the scent of smoke. The Bellman's warnings were for the safety of the body, but another official patrolled a landscape of moral danger, armed with the power to summon a soul before a higher court. Geoffrey Chaucer introduced the world to this figure with grotesque, unforgettable detail, a summoner whose face was covered in sores, a man who, for a quart of wine, would let a fellow keep a mistress for a year. This was more than satire, it was a portrait of a real and deeply resented profession. The summoner was a minor officer of the ecclesiastical courts, the church's own legal system. His duty sounded straightforward: to deliver official summonses to individuals accused of breaking canon law, the moral and religious codes of the time. The offenses could range from adultery and fornication to usury, blasphemy, or suspected heresy. A person receiving that summons was obligated to appear before the church court, where punishments could be severe, including public penance, heavy fines, or even excommunication, a spiritual and social death sentence in a devout community. This power, placed in the hands of a low-ranking official who worked directly with the frightened populace, created a perfect recipe for corruption. The summoner operated in a profound legal gray area. He was not a sheriff or a king's man, but he carried the authority of the church, an institution whose reach extended into the afterlife. For many ordinary people, the threat of being dragged into this intimidating system was terrifying. And so the summoner's true, unofficial trade often flourished. He could use the mere threat of a summons, the shadow of scandal and expense, to extract bribes. A quiet payment, a favor, a gift of wine or food, could make that troublesome piece of parchment disappear. He became a predator on fear, turning spiritual authority into a private, petty revenue stream. Chaucer's summoner is a master of this shakedown, knowing all the secrets of the young people in his district and blackmailing them for his own gain. The profession's extinction was not the result of a sudden wave of moral reform, but of a slow, tectonic shift in the foundations of power itself. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century fundamentally challenged the very authority of the papal church and its courts. In many regions, these ecclesiastical legal systems were dismantled or saw their jurisdiction severely curtailed. At the same time, secular states were growing stronger, building more professional, centralized legal systems under royal or parliamentary control. The messy, overlapping jurisdictions of medieval law, where church and state courts could clash over the same person, began to clarify. The specific, problematic office of the summoner, an enforcer of church morality on the general populace, had no place in this new order. His role dissolved because the world decided that the power to accuse and judge in such personal matters should belong to a clearer, more accountable authority, or to no authority at all. The corrupt summoner vanished, but the tension he embodied between moral oversight and personal liberty, between institutional power and its potential for abuse, is a debate that has never truly left us. A wealthy merchant leaving a tavern after dark faced a gauntlet of invisible threats. The streets were not just dark, they were a treacherous soup of deep ruts, overflowing gutters, and unseen refuse. For the price of a single coin, a solution emerged from the shadows, a small, grimy hand holding aloft a flickering, smoking torch. This was the link boy, a human concession to the perilous night. Their tool was a link, a simple torch made from a rope soaked in pitch or tar, which burned with a smoky, pungent flame. Their clients were those who could afford the luxury of safe passage, gentlemen, merchants, and visitors to the city who needed to navigate from a lively tavern to a respectable inn, or from a grand house to the docks. The link boy did more than just hold a light. They were local guides. They knew which alley was a shortcut and which was a dead end favored by thieves, where the deepest mudholes lay after a rain, and how to skirt the worst of the night soil left by the Gong farmer's cart. They were living, breathing hazard lights, their very presence a buffer against the chaos of the unlit world. This was not a profession born from craft or guild, but from sheer economic desperation. Link boys were almost always children or adolescents from the poorest families, their small bodies and low social standing making them ideal for this humble, mobile service. They waited at key points around the city, like theater districts or market squares, hoping for a patron. The transaction was simple, a coin for light until the destination was reached. Yet this simple service laid bare a profound inequality. The right to safe mobility after sunset was a commodity that could be purchased. The wealthy bought light and guidance, while the poor, including the link boys themselves when their shift was done, had to navigate the same dangerous paths in darkness. The flickering link torch was not just a source of light, but a stark symbol of the divide between those who could afford to push back the night and those who were consumed by it. The end of this small, sad profession came not from a change in social conscience, but from a wave of technological civic improvement. The 19th century saw the widespread installation of public gas lighting in major cities across Europe and America. These were not the occasional oil lamps tended by the lamplighter, but vast networks of consistent bright flame that turned night into a perpetual, hazy twilight. Suddenly, the main thoroughfares were illuminated for everyone, rich and poor alike. The fundamental service the link boy provided, the creation of a personal pool of light in a sea of darkness, was no longer a private luxury. It became a public utility, a shared resource paid for by taxes or rates, not individual coins pressed into a child's hand. The link boy vanished because the city itself began to glow. Their extinction is a quiet testament to how infrastructure can democratize something as basic as safety, rendering an entire category of menial, inequality-driven labor obsolete. The dark, personal dependency on a child with a torch was replaced by the impersonal, equalizing glare of the gas lamp, a light that asked for no coin and made no distinction between its beneficiaries. The link boy's torch was a private purchase, but on the vast, open fields of the manor, a different kind of authority was earned, not bought. The Reeve was a man living in two worlds at once, and his position was a tightrope strung between the manor house and the village. Elected from among his fellow peasants, often for his proven skill and sharp mind, he was the Lord's chosen manager of the land. His daily reality was a relentless balancing act. He organized the plowing and the harvest, assigned work on the Lord's personal fields, and made sure every ox, plow, and sack of seed was accounted for. He collected the rents not in coin, but in bundles of wheat, days of labor, and chickens owed to the Lord. It was a job that demanded an encyclopedic knowledge of soil, weather, and human nature, for he was responsible for turning the land's potential into the Lord's profit. This gave him immense local power, a rare peasant who could command respect and sometimes inspire fear. Yet he was never truly one of the gentry. He ate the same coarse bread, lived under the same thatched roof, and felt the same hardships as the people he supervised. His loyalty was perpetually divided, pressured from above to extract maximum yield for the Lord, and pulled from below by the needs and grumbling of his neighbors. Geoffrey Chaucer captured this perfectly in his Canterbury Tales, sketching a Reeve who was lean, choleric, and shrewd, a man who knew all the secrets of the manor and had grown rich from his careful management, yet remained austere and distant, trusted by no one fully. The Reeve's world was the feudal system in miniature, a delicate ecosystem of obligation and reciprocity. That world was shattered by a cascade of events beginning with the Black Death. The catastrophic loss of life created a labor shortage, giving surviving peasants unprecedented bargaining power to demand wages for their work instead of being bound by service. Slowly, the old manorial system, with its strips of land and required labor days, began to crumble. Lords found it easier to rent out their land to tenant farmers for cash or to convert fields to pasture for more profitable sheep. As the economic glue of feudalism dissolved, the Reeve's specific role lost its meaning. There was no communal labor to organize if everyone was a wage earner or a renter. The duties of oversight did not vanish, but they transformed. On larger estates, a professional class of stewards and bailiffs, often educated men with no ties to the local village, took over management. On smaller farms, the farmer managed his own land. The Reeve, as the chief peasant caught between two masters, became an administrative ghost. His disappearance marks not the end of farm management, but the end of a particular kind of community, one where authority was both granted by a lord and rooted in the shared soil of the village itself. He was the last manager of a vanishing world, his authority extinguished not by a better manager, but by the collapse of the entire social architecture that made his difficult dual life necessary. The Reeve managed the land, but the cloth he wore carried a different mark of authority, one pressed into the fabric itself by a royal hand. In the bustling cloth halls of medieval England, amidst the bolts of freshly fulled wool, stood a figure whose judgment could make or break a merchant's fortune. This was the Alnager, the king's own inspector of woolen cloth, and his seal was the passport for one of the kingdom's most vital exports. Appointed directly by the crown, the Alnager was a walking symbol of standardized trade in a world of local variation. His duty was precise and critical. After the weaver and the fuller had done their work, the finished cloth would be brought before him. He would unfurl it across a long table, his movements methodical. First came the official ell, a carefully maintained yardstick that was the law's own measure. He checked the length and the width against strict regulations, ensuring no merchant was selling short measure. Then his fingers would test the quality, feeling for the density of the weave and the consistency of the fulling, making sure the fabric was durable and met the grade. Only when every condition was satisfied would he take his seal, a metal stamp bearing the royal arms or a distinctive symbol, and press it into the corner of the cloth with a dab of wax or ink. That small, official mark transformed a simple bolt of wool into a certified commodity. It was a guarantee, a promise to buyers at home and in distant markets like Flanders that they were getting exactly what they paid for. This system of royal inspection was the bedrock of trust in a major industry. It prevented fraud, ensured fair taxation on a valuable export, and protected England's reputation for quality woolens abroad. The Alnager was not just a bureaucrat, he was a key gear in the economic engine of the nation. His slow fade from the scene mirrors a shift in the very nature of industry and governance. As England's economy diversified and the central importance of the wool trade gradually declined, the need for this specific royal officer diminished. More importantly, the regulation of goods became too vast and complex for a single medieval office. The Industrial Revolution demanded nationwide systems of weights and measures, factory inspections, and commercial standards administered by entire government departments, not by individual seal holders in provincial towns. The Alnager's specific function, to personally stamp a bolt of cloth, was absorbed into these broader, impersonal systems of quality control and consumer protection. His legacy is not a forgotten title, but a foundational idea that for commerce to flourish on a large scale, buyers and sellers must agree on the rules and someone must enforce them. That small, inked stamp was the ancestor of the barcode, the certification mark, and the regulatory agency, a medieval solution to a timeless problem of trust in the marketplace. Even the Gong farmer had a colleague who faced a more concentrated version of the same horror. In the dense heart of a city like London, the simple pit privy gave way to something far more formidable, the deep, brick-lined cesspit. These were vast subterranean chambers built beneath tenements and taverns, designed to hold months or even years of accumulated waste. To maintain them required not just removal but descent. This was the domain of the cesspit emptier, a specialist within a specialty whose job description was a sentence no one would ever wish to read. While the Gong farmer worked in the open air of a courtyard, the emptier had to climb down into the pit itself. The environment was beyond foul, a confined space where the very air could turn to poison. As organic matter decomposed in these oxygen-starved voids, it released methane, a highly flammable gas, and hydrogen sulfide, a toxic vapor that could overwhelm the senses and stop the heart in minutes. A single misstep, a disturbed pocket of gas, or a weak breath of air could mean a sudden, silent collapse. Their tools were rudimentary: a shovel, a bucket on a rope, and a hope that the brick walls around them would not give way under the saturated soil. They worked in a state of perpetual, intimate danger, their lives balanced against the city's need to manage its own filth. This extreme specialization tells us something profound about the medieval and early modern world of work. It was not just about having a job, it was about owning a specific, often terrible, piece of the problem. The cesspit emptier did not do other tasks. They were the human solution for this one precise and lethal function. Their existence speaks to a labor market fragmented into 1,000 tiny, necessary horrors, each with its own expert who bore the physical and social cost. The end of this profession is a direct line on a graph of human safety. It was not replaced by a braver or better equipped worker, but by an entire reimagining of the urban landscape. The great sewer projects of the 19th century, like Joseph Bazalgette's system in London, did more than move waste, they erased the need for the cesspit itself. Later, the invention of the vacuum tanker truck allowed for the mechanical evacuation of any remaining holding tanks from the safety of the street above. The human body was removed from the equation entirely. The specialized knowledge of how to survive in a toxic void became obsolete, not because we forgot it, but because we engineered a world where no one should ever need to know it. The Cesspit Emptier's chapter closes not with a celebration of progress, but with a quiet acknowledgement of a hardship we collectively chose to design out of existence. Their legacy is invisible, written in the clean, safe distance we now maintain from the most basic byproducts of our own lives. The bowman's power was born not on the battlefield but in the quiet workshop. The longbow was a masterpiece of natural engineering, and its creation was a patient art split between two distinct masters, the bowyer and the fletcher. One shaped the weapon and the other crafted its voice. The bowier's search began in the forest, seeking the perfect stave of yew wood. This was not a simple branch, but a carefully selected piece that combined two different materials in one tree. The heartwood, dense and resistant to compression, formed the bow's belly, the side facing the archer. The springy, elastic sapwood became the back, which stretched under the draw. Splitting and shaping this wood was a dialogue with the grain, a process of revealing the bow hidden within the log over the course of a year or more. The bowyer used draw knives and scrapers, constantly checking the bend, ensuring the limbs curved evenly to distribute the immense stress. A single flaw, a hidden knot or an uneven taper, could cause the bow to snap with lethal force when drawn. This was not mass production, it was a slow covenant between craftsman and material, resulting in a tool that was both beautifully simple and terrifyingly powerful. Its partner was the arrow, and this was the fletcher's domain. His work was one of meticulous assembly and physics. He started with straight shafts of ash or poplar, which he would spine or test for stiffness to match the power of the bow. Then came the fletching, the three feathers that stabilized the arrow's flight. These were not attached randomly. A master fletcher knew the feathers had to be aligned with a slight helical twist, like the rifling in a gun barrel, to make the arrow spin smoothly in the air. The glue had to be strong enough to withstand wind and speed, yet applied with a precision that did not upset the arrow's delicate balance. Finally, he fitted the arrowhead, a task that varied from forging broad, barbed heads for hunting to hammering out sleek, armor-piercing bodkins for war. Together, the bowyer and fletcher formed the complete military supply chain for England's most feared weapon system. Their workshops were hubs of strategic industry, their output measured in the thousands for royal armories. Their slow, careful craftsmanship was the foundation upon which the rapid storm of arrows at Agincourt was built. The end of their era as essential military suppliers came not from a decline in skill, but from a shift in the very chemistry of conflict. The rise of reliable gunpowder weapons in the 16th century changed the economics of war. A musket and its shot could be produced by metalworkers and powder mills in a fraction of the time it took to season yew wood and hand-fletch arrows. The state's need shifted from thousands of artisan-crafted bows to tens of thousands of uniformly cast barrels and standardized lead balls. The vast crown-sponsored demand that sustained whole communities of bowires and fletchers evaporated almost within a generation. Their art did not die, but it retreated. Today, these titles are kept alive by dedicated enthusiasts, historical reenactors, and hunters who cherish the traditional craft. The modern bowire might work with fiberglass and carbon fiber as well as wood, and the fletcher may use modern adhesives and machining tools, but the core relationship remains a deep understanding of materials and ballistics. Their transition from vital arms manufacturers to guardians of a niche craft is a profound lesson in how technological revolutions do not just erase tools. They dismantle entire ecosystems of human expertise, leaving only the echoes of their once essential rhythm in the hands of those who remember. The bowire and fletcher's craft was a public, celebrated skill, but another form of healing knowledge was cultivated in private gardens and passed in whispers from mother to daughter. In the shadow of the manor and beyond the reach of the monastery's infirmary, health was a local secret tended by the hands of the herbalist or wise woman. She was the village living pharmacy, its emergency midwife, and its first responder to both human and animal illness. Her classroom was the forest edge, the meadow, and the kitchen garden. She knew which leaf could soothe a burn, which root might settle a troubled stomach, and which berry, in the wrong dose, could bring on a deep sleep. This was not a hobby, but a vital, lifelong study of the green world, a blend of careful observation, inherited tradition, and a deep, practical intimacy with the bodies she treated. Her role was holistic long before the word existed, addressing pain, childbirth, and even the emotional troubles of her neighbors with poultices, teas, and counsel. Her authority came not from a university degree, but from generations of proven results and the trust of a community that had nowhere else to turn. Yet this position of respect existed on a perilous ledge. Her knowledge was power, and in a world governed by strict religious and male authority, that power was inherently suspect. Her understanding of plants that could heal or harm, her role in the intimate mysteries of birth, and her occasional use of charms or rituals alongside her remedies placed her in a dangerous gray area. If a patient she treated took a turn for the worse, or if she crossed a local priest or a jealous rival, the accusation was always waiting in the wings. She could be transformed in a fearful whisper from a wise woman into a witch. The early modern witch hunts did not invent this fear, they weaponized it, often targeting these independent female healers whose very competence challenged the emerging, male-controlled medical establishment. The demise of her role as the community's primary healer was a slow squeeze from multiple directions. The founding of formal medical schools, which excluded women, created a new class of licensed physicians who dismissed her plant lore as mere superstition. The rise of the apothecary shop, with its exotic imported ingredients and standardized preparations, offered a commercial, scientific alternative to her locally gathered remedies. Slowly, systematically, her centuries of accumulated, place-specific wisdom was recast as backward folklore, and her sanctioned space within village life shrank and then vanished. To say she was made obsolete, however, is only a partial truth. She was also persecuted, suppressed, and professionally erased. The revival of herbalism and holistic health in recent decades is a reclamation of that knowledge, but it exists in an utterly different world. The modern herbalist is a choice, often a certified professional operating within a broader wellness landscape. The village wise woman was not a choice, she was a necessity, the fragile, essential thread that held a community's health together, operating with an authority that was both unquestioned and constantly under threat. Her story is perhaps the most complex of all these vanished jobs, a testament not to technological progress, but to a cultural shift that rewrote who was allowed to know, to heal, and to hold power over life itself. A final pattern emerges not from any one job, but from looking across all 30 of them at once. When we step back, we see that their disappearance was not a series of random accidents. It was a great, slow wave of change, and its currents have distinct names. The most powerful force, visible again and again, is technological innovation. This is the story of a better tool replacing a person. The printing press silenced the scriptorium. The light bulb extinguished the need for the lamplighter and the link boy. The sewer pipe and the flush toilet retired the gong farmer and the cesspit emptier. The simple, mass-produced alarm clock made the knocker-up's morning tap obsolete. In each case, a machine, a system, or a device was invented that could do the work more reliably, more cheaply, or on a scale no human ever could. Technology did not just change how we did things, it erased the need for the doer entirely. Running parallel to this is the current of social and political change. Here, it is not a machine that ends a job, but a new idea about how society should be organized. The Protestant Reformation dismantled the theological marketplace that employed the pardoner. The slow death of the feudal system and its manorial obligations erased the purpose of the Reeve and the Hayward. The creation of professional, centralized police forces replaced the solitary crier of the watch. The Enclosure Acts, which privatized common land, did not just change farming, they dissolved the entire community structure that required a Hayward to mediate it. These shifts show that when we change our minds about power, justice, or community, the human roles built for the old world simply crumble. Then there is the tide of scientific advancement, which does not replace a tool or a law, but replaces an entire understanding of reality. The alchemist's quest fractured and became the evidence-based fields of chemistry and pharmacology once we understood the true nature of matter. The plague doctor's haunting costume was retired when germ theory revealed how illness actually spread, replacing rituals against bad air with strategies against pathogens. The theory of the four humors, which sustained the Leech collector's entire trade, evaporated under the microscope, replaced by the biology of the cell and the circulatory system. When our fundamental map of how the world works is redrawn, the professions that navigated by the old map are left stranded. Finally, we see the relentless pressure of economic shifts. Industrialization is the prime mover here, reshaping not just products but the very logic of labor. The factory's demand for punctuality created the knocker-up, and then the factory's production of cheap clocks eliminated him. The Cordwainer, crafting bespoke shoes from luxury leather, could not compete with the economics of the factory line producing thousands of identical pairs. The Bowyer and Fletcher, masters of a supreme weapon, were outpaced by the brutal cost-effectiveness of training a musketman in weeks instead of years. Economic efficiency favors scale and standardization, and the unique handcrafted skill often becomes a luxury or a memory. So these jobs did not just vanish into thin air. They were transformed, their functions absorbed into new systems. The ale conner's duty lives on in food safety regulations. The town crier's voice echoes in our 24-hour news channels. The Scrivener's craft is now a software program on every computer. Others were made completely redundant, their very reason for being engineered out of existence. We no longer need someone to warn us about fire because we have smoke detectors, or to empty our waste because we have plumbing. This collective disappearance tells a single, sweeping story. It is the story of humanity's relentless, often unconscious, drive to solve problems, to reduce danger, to increase comfort, and to build a world that runs more smoothly. We trade the peculiar, the personal, and the perilous for the efficient, the safe, and the predictable. In doing so, we gain incredible conveniences, but we also lose something: the rich tapestry of characters who once gave the world its texture, its smells, and its strange, specific sounds. Their ghosts remind us that progress is not just about what we build, but also about what and who we choose to leave behind. These vanished roles are not relics locked in a forgotten past. They are mirrors reflecting the fluid, ever-changing nature of work itself. Our journey through 30 extinct professions reveals a fundamental truth: a job is not a permanent fixture, but a temporary solution to a specific problem posed by its time. The needs that created these roles have not disappeared, they have simply been answered in new languages. We no longer require a human knocker-up, but our smartphones chime with sleep cycle reminders. The town crier's official proclamation now vibrates in our pocket as a push notification. The scrivener's careful hand has been replaced by the cursor blinking in a word processor, awaiting our command. Even the communal trust once placed in the Alchemist, that guardian of public quality, finds its modern echo in the star ratings and user reviews we scroll through before trying a new restaurant or purchasing a product online. The form is different, sleek and digital, but the human desire for assurance, for shared knowledge, and for reliable routine remains utterly unchanged. Work, then, is a profound reflection of a society's deepest needs, its collective fears, and the height of its technological imagination. The Gong farmer existed because cities had no sewers. The plague doctor walked because science had no germ theory. The whipping boy stood in because culture believed a prince's body was divine. Each job was a living artifact, a piece of social DNA that encoded the values, limitations, and priorities of its world. Their disappearance is not a record of failure, but a map of human adaptation. We engineered away the dangers, automated the routines, and systematized the services, trading personalized, often perilous human effort for scalable, predictable systems. This transformation has granted us immense safety and convenience, but it also asks a poignant question about what we leave behind in that exchange: the texture of human contact, the dignity of a unique craft, the familiar face that knew your name and your needs. This historical perspective becomes urgently relevant as we stand on the brink of our own revolutions. Artificial intelligence, automation, and technologies we can scarcely imagine are reshaping our landscape of labor right now. The same currents that swept away the Fuller and the Cooper technological innovation, economic shift, social reorganization, are flowing with renewed force today. It invites us to look at our own world with the same curious, detached gaze we turned upon the medieval one. Which of our modern jobs will seem just as strange, as charmingly archaic, or as shockingly perilous to people 500 years from now? Will the long-haul trucker, the retail cashier, or the data entry clerk be seen as the knocker-ups and scriveners of our digital age? The answer is not a source for anxiety, but for thoughtful reflection. History shows us that work evolves, it does not end. New problems will emerge, and with them, new roles we cannot yet conceive, roles that will answer the unique questions of a future we are only beginning to build. Thank you for joining this exploration of the medieval workplace. If you discovered a forgotten ancestor in this long list of vanished vocations, or if you have thoughts on which modern profession might be the next to fade into history, share your insights in the comments below. Your perspective continues the conversation. For more journeys into the fascinating corners of history, subscribe and join us as we keep uncovering the stories hidden in plain sight.